Great. Thank you very much, Eddie. My name is Aaron Dietzen. I am a customer success manager here at Trimble for the SketchUp product. And I want to talk a little bit about our take on visualization and why the things that Epic Games is doing with the Unreal Studio are so important to our professional user base. So, first thing I want to do, if you guys will indulge me, is going to take a quick look at the history of SketchUp, which kind of sets us up for how we see visualization today. So SketchUp was created by a company called Atlas Software about 16 years ago, right here in Boulder, Colorado, and they had a simple concept, which is the ability to explore 3D spaces shouldn't be something that only architects can do with expensive software. So that's when they came up with SketchUp. So SketchUp was a tool that let people with not a whole lot of computer hardware, no high-end hardware, actually create and draw in 3D, make it quick to learn, make it easy to use. That was the basic idea, and that's where the catchphrase 3D for everyone came from. That's something that has been in the core, the blood of SketchUp ever since the beginning. It turned out to be a pretty good idea, and it was something that was interesting to other companies. In fact, some big companies like Google, they thought that was pretty cool, and they actually purchased SketchUp from Atlas Software. This turned out to be a pretty good thing. Google did a great job of spreading the word of SketchUp. In fact, to this day, we still have people referring to our product as Google SketchUp, even though Google hasn't owned it for about 6 years. Back then, a different company came along and purchased SketchUp from Google, and that company, of course, was Trimble, which is currently where SketchUp resides. So despite changing hands several times, the core concept of SketchUp has remained the same, making it quick to learn, easy to use, to model things in 3D. And we still use that term, 3D for everyone. We thought this is a pretty good thing to do. We're still trying to do it, and a lot of other people think it's a good idea too, because we actually are one of the most widely used 3D modeling software packages in the world. Over 30 million people use SketchUp any given year. This is a great thing. We do have a lot of people using it for everything from modeling toys or watches to furniture to spaceships. But our largest professional user base is the same as it always has been, which is architectural and building design. And one of the main reasons they use it is, of course, visualization. So when we talk about visualization, what we're talking about is the way that we go about viewing in 3 dimensions an idea or a concept. So before something actually gets built, we need to take a look at it, and that is where visualization is. It's that ability to experience something before it exists in real space. Now, this is what architects and building designers have been doing since the very start. Of course, the way that they did it to begin with was with paper plans. These 2D representations of 3D space did what they needed to do, but they weren't always easy to read. As a design professional, I can sit down and look at a 10 by 10 space called out on a piece of paper and have an idea of what that feels like. What's it going to feel like with an 8-foot ceiling versus a 9-foot ceiling? What does it look like with the doors and windows on this side of the room versus this side of the room? How's that going to change things? A design professional can look at those 2D pages and understand that. And we try to make that something that's easy to comprehend for customers. We add things like elevations and sections and isometric views. And it works out okay, but it's not something everybody catches on to right away. That's why we have to do things like practical models. So these foam core or balsa wood or even 3D printed models give somebody a chance to look inside and see how that actually exists in 3D space. It's all right, I can do things like light studies and flows through rooms and that sort of thing, but it's still not a real experience. I can't jump down and stand inside that. Plus, as changes are made, that potentially means starting over on a model, which can be time-consuming and expensive. This, of course, is where software like SketchUp comes into play. With a SketchUp model, I can not only navigate through a space, I can actually stand inside a model and look out of it as if it were real size. Changes that need to be made can be made real time without any costly rework or anything like that. It's a great way to help somebody who is not a design professional experience a space in 3D. But it's not complete, and it's not the ultimate way to view or experience that space. One of the things that a lot of people end up doing is, of course, they get into rendering and animations and that sort of thing. This is not a bad solution either. This is kind of the next step. But there is a limitation to rendered or videos from inside of a 3D model. And that, of course, is that it's on rails. It's limited to a single view, that sort of thing. This is where we believe that real-time rendering is better than those rendered images. Rendered images can be great, they can look great, but fact is, you don't get to move through a rendered image. Even with pre-recorded videos or fly-throughs or fly-arounds, you're limited to the path that the designer wanted to show. With real-time rendering, the customer gets to immerse themselves in the model and move where they want to. It sounds silly, but a lot of customers have a way that they want to look at the house that they're building that may be different from the prize shot that a designer wants to show them. Real-time lets them do that. So, what's the best way to let a customer experience real-time? Well, we're biased, of course, but we think Unreal Engine and SketchUp are a great way to do this. Epic Games and Trimble have products that work very well together. As of this 4.2 release, allow you to seamlessly integrate your SketchUp model into your Unreal design. So why Epic Games and Trimble? Well, a couple reasons. The first one is speed. So when we're talking about conceptual modeling, conceptual means I have to go quickly. I can't spend days, weeks, months on a potential design. I need to get it turned around quickly. In fact, the matter is, SketchUp is known for its speed in those sorts of design situations. Conceptual modeling is something that is done every day by design professionals inside of the SketchUp software. And usability. So as we already talked about, with SketchUp, it is easy to use, it's quick to turn around a model, but looking at it from your customer's point of view, the deliverable out of the Unreal Engine is about as simple as it can get when it comes to navigating in 3D space. This gives your customer the ability to go where they want in the model and walk through in a natural way, using their arrow keys to just navigate wherever they want. It's quick and it's easy to do. And finally, experience. SketchUp's been the go-to modeler for conceptual modeling for a decade and a half. A lot of 3D modelers nowadays cut their teeth on SketchUp. And Unreal, of course, Epic Games has taught an entire generation how to navigate spaces in 3D. So between the two, we have decades of experience in 3D modeling and allowing people to explore that 3D space. So really, that explains what we think of visualization and why we think Unreal and SketchUp work so well together to help you give your customer a unique experience in their designs. Now, Chris is going to take over and talk a little bit about the real-time workflow, how that actually works, and what it looks like inside the software. So I'll pass it over to you. Take it away, Chris.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate the intro. Hi, everyone. Yeah, Chris Murray here from Unreal Engine Enterprise. Let's go ahead and jump right in and take a look at some of the technical workflows for going from SketchUp to Unreal Engine with Unreal Studio Datasmith. So, like I mentioned earlier, yes, we now support SketchUp with our Unreal Studio Datasmith workflows. Let's take a look and see what that really means for all kinds of different workflows, not just SketchUp. So, what it means is that we're now able to go from places like 3ds Max and Rhino and now SketchUp and a ton of CAD formats and some other things coming down the pipe later this year. We're able to move those into Unreal Engine a lot easier with Datasmith. And for those of you that are new to the Unreal Studio Datasmith workflow, it's pretty straightforward when it comes to SketchUp. But let's go ahead and take a look specifically. So what we want to do is we want to get a really nice looking piece of content from SketchUp and get it into Unreal Engine and preserve much of the original look as possible. Now, this has a lot of implications for how you create your content, and we'll get into that in a few minutes. But let's at least take a look at some of the SketchUp workflows. So the SketchUp workflows look something like this. The workflow is very similar for a 3ds Max user. You simply export from SketchUp and then re-import a .u datasmith file into Unreal Engine. We have re-import workflows in Unreal so that if you make changes upstream, we can capture those changes in Unreal Engine. It is important to note, though, this plugin isn't necessarily doing any geometry fixing. You're still going to have to pay particular attention to how you are setting up and creating your geometry. You want to make sure that you're creating it in a way that is friendly to a real-time engine. And again, we'll take a look at that in a minute. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the workflows here. Before we jump in, just a couple of quick notes. I'm going to show this workflow from the point of view of someone who is relatively new to Unreal Engine and Unreal Studio Datasmith. So if you're already an Unreal Studio Datasmith user in some of the other applications that we support, this may seem a little bit repetitive to you, but I just want to be sure we cover all of the bases from the beginning of someone who might be new to Unreal Studio, but is a SketchUp user. So this is a nice piece of content that we acquired from our friends on the 3D Warehouse. So thanks to them for providing some great content that we can show and present to you today. So real simply put, after we have installed Unreal Studio and the Unreal Studio plugins, we go right to the File menu, and we'll just do File, Export a 3D Model. From here is where we can actually choose to export our datasmith file. So we'll just go ahead and we'll call this mono_2, and we'll just choose a quick export. And there's really not a whole lot to do on the exporting side. It's the importing side where things get interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and bring over the Unreal Engine launcher, which I have already started. Now, it's important that if you're going to be trying this out for yourself, you want to be using version 420. We're currently in the preview of 420. So you want to have Preview 3 specifically installed. If you don't have Preview 3 installed, you may get a little wonkiness in terms of some of the assets that are brought in. So you just want to make sure that you're using Preview 3. I'm going to go ahead and launch a new project with Unreal Studio 420, Preview 3, and we'll bring it right in. Okay, so now that it has launched, it's brought up the Unreal Project Browser. And on the New Project tab, you'll see there are 3 sub-tabs. There's the Blueprint tab, the C++ tab, and the Unreal Studio tab. We want to create a project with a blank Unreal Studio project because this is going to give us access to the Unreal Studio Datasmith plugins. So I'm going to rename this something similar. We'll go ahead and create our project there, and we'll give it a chance to load the editor. Okay, so now that the editor is loaded, we're going to go ahead and import our Datasmith file. But before we do that, I just want to very, very quickly, for those SketchUp users that may be new to Unreal Engine, the 2 main areas of the interface that we're going to be worrying about for this webinar at least is the World Outliner, which is over here. If you just select any object in the World Outliner, you can see it's a cascading or a top-down file system, meaning that whatever object you select here changes what you see below here. So that's what all of this different information means, is as you get more comfortable in Unreal Engine, a lot of this will make a lot more sense to you. There's also different tabs up here. So there's layers, levels, and back to the World Outliner. We're also going to be working down here in the lower third portion of the screen. This is called the Content Browser down here at the bottom. And when we start bringing things into Unreal Engine via Datasmith, we're going to see this area is going to be populated by a large number of assets. So let's go ahead and let's do a Datasmith import. So to import something with Datasmith, we're just going to choose the Datasmith button which is here at the top of the viewport. You can see it says Import Datasmith. If I click on the little down arrow to the right of the button, you can see that there is Import Datasmith, Import CAD, and a couple of other import options. Obviously, we're interested in the Import Datasmith function at this point. So I'll just choose Import Datasmith, and we'll go find the file that we just exported, which was mono_2, and the import dialog box appears. This is where we need to make our first decision. So we can either import directly into the content folder, or since scene organization is really important when using Unreal Engine, we're going to create a new folder here. So under content, I'm going to right click, I'm going to say new folder, and we'll type in a folder name for this. We'll name it SketchUp, and we'll say OK. And the dialog box for the Datasmith importer appears, and this is where we get to make the next set of decisions. So it's pretty straightforward at this point. We want to bring in geometries, materials, and textures. There are no lights in this scene because I'm not using V-Ray lights or the V-Ray renderer for SketchUp, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave that checked anyways. And I could also bring in cameras at this point. Obviously, we're really mainly concerned with geometry and materials and textures. The other options to choose are the light map resolutions. And we're not going to go too deep into what light maps are if you're new to Unreal Engine from SketchUp, but just be aware that this is a second set of UVs that are used in the lighting and shading processes of Unreal Engine. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose Import, and we'll let Unreal Engine do its thing and bring in our Datasmith file from SketchUp. And here it is. Our file has been brought in, and you can see that we have some really good fidelity compared to the file that we had in SketchUp. I'm going to go ahead and bring SketchUp back, and we can take a look. So here's the file again that we had in SketchUp, and here is the file that we have in Unreal Engine. So all of the translation has occurred. The objects have been brought in. The textures have been brought in. All of the objects are in their proper place. All of the materials that have been created are properly applied, and everything is just as we would expect it to be. This is one of the real advantages of Datasmith, and that we don't have to redo a lot of work. The goal, again, is to make it easy to on-ramp into Unreal Engine and really start working quickly here, as opposed to having to redo a lot of work. So what actually imports, and how is this handled between SketchUp and Unreal Engine? So in Unreal Engine, we have the notion of a thing called a static mesh object. And so static mesh objects are derived from SketchUp meshes that have either connected faces or that are part of the same group or component. And let's go ahead and take a look and see what that actually means. So I'm going to go ahead and bring back SketchUp here, and I'm going to focus on a couple of different things right in here. So we have our sofa and our entertainment area that has the TV and the books and things on it. So I'm going to select the sofa first, and you can see over here it's called a couch group, and it has a couple of different components underneath it. And you know, we have the cushions and a hierarchy of objects that are part of the couch component. So what does that look like in Unreal Engine? So I'm going to pop back over to Unreal Engine, and I'm going to select this object, and we'll zoom in on our couch. And so here's the couch object, and you can see that if I open up the world outliner, you can see that the object has come in, all of our hierarchy is maintained, but all of the component groups have been converted to single static mesh actors. Anything that was a component in SketchUp is turned into a static mesh actor in Unreal. But what about the Entertainment Center? Let's talk about that. This is actually kind of an important thing to understand about Unreal Engine. If I go back over to SketchUp and I select this component, you can see that, let me go ahead and get my orbiting here. You can see that this is actually treated as one group. When it comes into Unreal Engine, it's treated as a single static mesh actor. And all of these objects are lumped together. Now, you may think that that could be a good thing, but it actually does have some implications in terms of textures and light baking. So again, this is the world outliner. And if I scroll down below here, I can get into the details panel of this piece of geometry. And I'm going to double click on the static mesh actor. This will bring open a viewer that will let us see the static mesh actor by itself. And we can see that this is a single object, but it appears to be made up of several different objects. And this is a really important piece of information to think about when you are creating your scenes to be exported via Datasmith to Unreal Engine and how they will be treated. When you organize an object like this, you really lose the ability to do certain types of material edits or light baking or other types of tweaks to the surface properties that you might actually want to have control of in Unreal Engine. And the reason you lose control of that is because this is now treated as one object. If we look at the material and the texture of this piece of geometry, we can see that all of the different elements of the object group from SketchUp are combined into this one material. And if we navigate over to the texture map, we can see it illustrated even more. So this isn't really going to be very useful if we're going to try and do any edits on the static mesh or the individual components of the static mesh in Unreal Engine. A better approach would be to, back in SketchUp, organize these in such a way that they're individual components, where the wall would be a separate component, each shelving unit would be a separate component. If you do that, that is going to break them apart upon the import into Unreal Engine and give you some better options when it comes to what you can do with it. So, speaking of materials and textures, let's talk a little bit about what actually happens when those things are brought into Unreal Engine. The first thing that happens is a dedicated material instance is created by Datasmith, and this indicates or reflects kind of what the basic material parameters are from SketchUp. We also generate some extra physically based rendering parameters, or PBR parameters. These aren't typically available in SketchUp, but in Unreal Engine, they're very useful in improving the quality and realism of the materials. So let's go ahead and take a look at those things and see what I mean. Okay, we're back in Unreal Engine, and I've just moved my eye point a little bit. Let's go ahead and adjust the exposure here just so that we can see some things. I'm going to turn off the game settings feature in the view mode dropdown, and I'm just going to crank down the EV value a little bit just to brighten things up so it's a little easier to see. Now, like I said, I haven't really done a whole lot here to sweeten the image. We're getting to that, but I do want to take a look at some of the material properties that we've created. So I'm just going to select the floor object. Now, before I jump into the floor material, I'm over here on the details panel, and you can see that this was brought in as a group, and this has a little bit of the same issue as the wall with the TV panel, and that a lot of things came over that really probably should have been separate objects, or at least separate groups in SketchUp. This is going to be a little tricky to work with in the long run. For this example here, it'll be fine, but you're really going to want to have a better consideration about how you break up your object groups so that you're able to work with them a little bit. So let's go ahead and close this back up. I'm going to scroll down in the details panel and look for the wood material that's on the floor. This is element 6 here. That's what this material is. So I can either open the material here, or I can go into my content browser, and here's the SketchUp folder where we brought everything in. And if I start to open up some of these folders, you can see that I have geometry, materials, and textures. I'm going to go ahead and open up materials, and you can see we have, all of our materials are brought in right here. And this is the material that we're going to look at right now. It's the same material that's over here on the details panel. So I can either double click it here, or I can double click it here. Either one is the same. Although this one is actually the one that's on the object. So I've opened up the material editor. You can see our material opens up. This has the same SketchUp materials that we have on the object that's come from SketchUp. But what I want to draw your attention to is this new set of options right here. This is what we've added on import. And these are the PBR features, or physically based rendering features, that we've added to the material. We've added some metallic settings. We've added the use of a roughness map or roughness intensity. So if I change these, it will change the appearance of the floor. So I'm going to move this down a little bit and see if I can get to this setting here. So you can see that we can begin to add some reflectivity. If we want to add in, like I said, a roughness map or a metallic map, we can add that in there. This is going to get you a little farther down the road faster in having some nice looking materials. While we're talking about materials and textures, let's take a look at some of the ways that Datasmith actually helps out with UV maps. So I'm going to navigate over here to the sink. I'm going to orbit around to where I can see the sink a little bit better, and we'll zoom in. So let's go ahead and open this up in the static mesh editor. So I will just navigate here up to the top of the details panel and double click, and we'll zoom in a little bit and we can get a good look at this piece of geometry. As SketchUp users are probably aware, there are some limitations when it comes to UVs in SketchUp and how they're controlled. Fortunately, we do one thing in Unreal Engine that aids in the use of UVs for light maps. So I've opened up the mesh viewer, the static mesh actor, and in the toolbar across the top we have a button here that says UVs. And if I go in here and I take a look at UV channel 0, those are the UVs that come over from SketchUp directly. You can see there's a lot of overlap in there. So if you have overlapping textures or overlapping UVs, your textures may look a little bit wonky. Unreal Engine is pretty forgiving when it comes to overlapping UVs in that it doesn't kick you any warnings, but really not a very good best practice for that, especially when it comes to possibly light baking your scenes. Now, what is light baking? Simply put, light baking is taking all of the lighting information that's in the scene and baking it into the textures. And this improves performance significantly. This is related to my previous comments about how objects should be divided up into more explicit or smaller object groupings. Because when it comes to light baking, you don't want to have everything be all one object because that's quite limiting. So back to UVs for a second. So if I go to my UV dropdown menu and I choose UV channel 2, this is what Datasmith has created upon import. This gives us the ability to have non-overlapping UVs that are usable for light baking. Now, you're not required to use the UV layout that is automatically generated. You can actually map your own UVs any place you want to. But if you have limited access to UV tools, or maybe your experience at laying out UVs isn't as robust, you might want to consider just leaving these UVs as it is and using the automated UV generation as your primary tool for generating light map UVs. Again, there may be an instance where you might need a more specific UV layout, but this will get you pretty far down the road before you have to do a lot of custom work. So let's go ahead and take a look at some things that you can do in SketchUp that will improve the probability of success for using Unreal Engine to visualize your scenes. First thing you might want to consider doing is using some extensions to help clean up your models and organize things and really just add some functionality to the models so that you can get some better out-of-the-box usability. To do this, you can go to the extension warehouse and get some of these extensions, and it'll make life a little bit easier for you. So when it comes to the outliner, you just want to make sure that you're using your groups and components properly, that you have everything grouped accordingly. Obviously a group is a single instance of geometry, and a component is a collection of those things. So the first thing you should really do is obviously organize it appropriately, but then name it properly. Good object names or good component names will translate into good static mesh actor names in Unreal Engine. So it's really important to have nice, clean file naming conventions, because that'll make everything a lot easier in Unreal Engine. Another component you can consider using is Cleanup Cubed. Cleanup Cubed is a nice extension because it basically kind of does a geometry check on a lot of your geometry. It will allow you to merge identical materials and show the statistics, but it also purge unused components or features of the geometry. It will repair edges. It will just basically clean up the geometry in a way that will make it more likely to have success and avoid problems with your geometry in Unreal Engine. The next one is Sketch UV. Oh, I talked a little bit about UVs in the material section, and that Unreal Engine is kind of forgiving when it comes to texture UVs, but not very forgiving at all when it comes to light map UVs. So using something like Sketch UV will at least give you a little bit of control over the texture UVs and will improve the probability of success of having good looking materials on your geometry as well. The last one is Solid Inspector Squared and Solid Tools. These two things may seem a little unusual when you're thinking about going to a real-time engine like Unreal Engine, but it actually makes a lot of sense. What these do is these basically double-check your models to make sure that they're watertight, as if you were going to 3D print them. The nice thing about this is that a 3D printed model has to be, completely closed, has to have good geometry, has to have no, open edges or stray vertices or things like that. And coincidentally, those same type of features make for good geometry in Unreal Engine. So using an extension like this will help you make sure that you have the best geometry possible before it heads over to Unreal Engine. There is one more thing I'd like to tell you about, and that is we've talked a lot about a lot of different things that are specific to Unreal Engine, but if you're coming to Unreal Engine from SketchUp, you might not be aware of these things. Things like post-process volumes to make images look great, UVW maps, lighting and materials, PBR, all of those different things. Well, we have a lot of resources for you that you can use for free. If you go to unrealengine.com and go to Resources dropdown, under Video Tutorials, you'll find a large number of video tutorials that have been prepared just for enterprise users. These are not how to make video games. These are things that are related specifically to design visualization, anything for interior real-time projects to exterior projects, real-time fundamentals, lighting essential concepts. These are all of the things that if you're new to Unreal will really ease your transition into working in a real-time environment in Unreal Engine. So I strongly recommend that you take some time to peruse these topics and see how you can apply them to the projects that you're working on in SketchUp and Unreal Engine. So that's it. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate the time that you spent with us so far. We're going to go into the live QA now with myself and Aaron. If you haven't done so already, please join the beta, unrealengine.com/studio, and this will get you access to the SketchUp exporter and the Datasmith importer and all of the substance sources for you to use, and give you access to some great training materials. So again, now's a great opportunity to go ahead and join us with Unreal Engine and do some great work. So thanks everyone, and let's head over to the live QA.